Right now, in millions of homes, people are intentionally sparking this massive, uncontrolled chemical combustion event.
Yeah, right in the exact same room where their kids play.
Exactly. And, the only thing stopping that cozy, postcard perfect winter fire from literally vaporizing the house is a string of invisible, highly specific engineering math.
It really is the absolute definition of playing with fire. I mean, we completely domesticate the idea of a wood stove, but fundamentally, you are bringing a 1,000-degree thermal engine into a structure made of dry wood.
Dry wood and synthetic fabric.
Right. And the margin for error is zero.
Which is terrifying when you put it like that. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are looking at the literal rule books that keep that fire in its cage. We're exploring the fascinating, incredibly high-stakes world of solid fuel heating safety standards.
We are looking at the official UL standards and engagement catalog pages for two very distinct active safety documents. That's UL1390 and UL1482.
And we have a very specific mission for this deep dive. We're going to cover a few crucial topics today. First, we'll explain the exact difference between UL1482 and UL1390.
Which is incredibly important right now.
It really is. Second, we're going to clarify the current status of UL1390. And third, we're going to provide some real guidance for you, the consumer, if you're out there trying to purchase a wood stove insert right now during what has become a very messy transition period.
It's chaotic out there. The delays in certification under UL 1390 are actively limiting access to compliant wood stoves.
Yeah, and most consumers are completely unaware of the difference between 1482 and 1390. They just want a heater. So retailers and installers are facing these massive challenges trying to explain compliance requirements and why there are delays.
Not to mention, code officials and insurance carriers are inconsistently citing acceptable standards. It depends entirely on who you ask.
It's a mess. The lack of clear public communication is causing so much confusion in the industry. And spoiler alert, by the end of this, we're going to talk about why UL needs to clear this issue up with a definitive public statement.
They absolutely do. But to understand the confusion, we first have to understand the standards themselves. These documents represent decades of synthesized mechanical engineering, fluid dynamics, and material science.
Right. They are the benchmark testing methodologies that a manufacturer has to pass before a product ever legally gets installed in your living room. And what struck me immediately is that a wood stove isn't just a wood stove.
No, not at all.
I always assumed there was, like
Yeah.
a generic safety checklist for anything that holds a fire. But the engineering required to keep you safe changes completely based on exactly where and how that fire is housed inside your home.
We have a really brilliant contrast in front of us today. We're looking at a brand new standard pushing the boundaries of retrofitting old homes alongside a veteran standard that has governed freestanding room heaters for well over a decade.
Let's start on the frontier, right? The newest document in our stack is UL 1390. This is edition 1.
Hot off the presses.
Literally. It was officially published and approved on November 13th, 2024. This isn't some proposal floating around a committee room. Its status is listed as active.
Right. It is the current enforceable law of the land for what the industry calls masonry inserts. And the scope of this standard is exceptionally narrow, which is actually what makes it so rigorous.
Okay, so what exactly does it cover?
It strictly covers solid fuel burning fireplace inserts and hearth-mounted stoves that are specifically intended for installation into masonry fireplaces.
Masonry meaning brick or stone.
Exactly. That includes brand new masonry builds, but crucially, it covers older, existing masonry fireplaces.
So we are talking about retrofits, and this is where my morbid curiosity really kicked in. Because if you think about the physical reality of a retrofit, it sounds incredibly dangerous.
Oh, it changes the thermal dynamics of the space completely.
Right. You have this existing brick or stone structure. Maybe it was built 100 years ago. It was designed for a lazy, open, crackling log fire. And now you're taking a modern, high-efficiency heating appliance and shoving it directly into that old stone cavity.
Yeah, a traditional open masonry fireplace is terribly inefficient. I mean, it loses the vast majority of its heat straight up the chimney. But the standard specifically notes that it covers modern units incorporating catalytic combustors or secondary combustion systems.
Let's pause on that, because those terms sound like they belong on a spacecraft, not in a living room. From what I understand, a secondary combustion system basically traps the smoke, which is just unburned fuel, and reignites it.
Precisely. It forces the exhaust gases through a ceramic honeycomb or a series of baffle tubes, lowering the ignition temperature of that smoke so it burns a second time.
Wow.
Yeah, this creates an incredibly intense, sustained heat. You are transforming a decorative stone fireplace into a high-yield thermal furnace.
It feels like taking a high-performance, modern combustion engine and just bolting it into a vintage Model T chassis. I mean, you're subjecting old brick and mortar to a level of thermal stress it was never originally engineered to handle.
Which is exactly why UL1390 demands such specific physical interventions.
Hmm.
Because you're absolutely right, you cannot just drop that modern engine into the old chassis and hope for the best.
And that brings us to a really specific rule in the text that outlines exactly how you have to handle the exhaust. UL 1390 requires venting through the throat or damper area of the masonry fireplace, but it mandates testing with a, and I'm quoting here, continuous chimney liner from the appliance collar to the point of termination.
Yes, that is a critical requirement.
So if I buy one of these new high-efficiency inserts, I can't just slide it into the fireplace, seal up the front panel, and let the smoke drift up the cavernous old brick chimney.
Absolutely not. And the reason comes down to the fluid dynamics of the smoke.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, if you take the extremely hot pressurized exhaust from a high-efficiency insert and just dump it into a wide, cold brick chimney, those gases undergo rapid expansion.
And when a gas expands rapidly in a large space, its temperature drops.
Drastically. It cools down way before it can escape the top of the chimney. And when that exhaust cools, the vapor condenses onto the cold brick walls.
Oh, and that condensation is creosote, right?
Exactly. Creosote is highly combustible. If you vent a modern insert directly into an unlined masonry chimney, you are essentially painting the inside of your home's structural columns with liquid rocket fuel.
That is terrifying. So the continuous liner, which is basically a stainless steel tube running from the top of the stove all the way up and out the roof, that tube maintains the pressure and the heat of the exhaust.
It perfectly sizes the exhaust pathway. It keeps the gases hot and moving fast so they draft properly and exit the home before they ever have a chance to cool and deposit that creosote.
So UL 1390 tests the appliance specifically to ensure that when it's hooked up to that continuous liner, the thermal balance prevents a catastrophic chimney fire.
Yes, exactly.
The level of hidden physics happening inside the walls is just staggering. And it becomes very clear why getting access to this engineering math isn't cheap. The catalog lists the purchase price of the UL 1390 standard anywhere from $505 up to over $1,250 depending on the format.
Yeah, that price tag is a clear signal to you, the listener, about the nature of these documents. These aren't user manuals. Manufacturers are paying for the exact, rigorous laboratory testing methodologies they have to replicate to prove their product won't burn a house down.
Right. But because 1390 builds this incredibly dense engineering fortress specifically around masonry fireplaces, it actually spends a huge portion of its text outlining exactly what it refuses to cover.
The boundaries of a safety standard are often just as illuminating as the core text.
Sections 1.6 and 1.7 are just a massive legal fence of exclusions. It explicitly excludes factory-built fireplaces, pointing those to completely different standards, UL127 in the US and ULC610 in Canada.
It also excludes steel liner assemblies.
Right, and it refuses to cover artificial fireplaces, steel-form fireplace units, and modular masonry fireplace systems. It even explicitly states it does not apply to transportable buildings unless they somehow happen to be designed with a heavy masonry fireplace.
Which, mechanically speaking, is a very rare architectural choice for a building designed to be moved on a highway. Who puts a brick chimney in a mobile home?
Right, exactly. But looking at this massive list of exclusions, I have to wonder why they are slicing the pie so thin. Why not just write one comprehensive fireplace safety standard that covers everything?
Because safety regulators cannot afford generalized math when material science is involved. The failure points of a massive brick chimney are fundamentally different from the failure points of a factory-built metal fireplace.
Let's follow that logic. A masonry fireplace is essentially a giant thermal battery. It absorbs the heat slowly over hours, right?
Yes, the mass of the stone manages the thermal load. But a factory-built fireplace is typically made of thin sheet metal, and it's usually installed directly inside the combustible wood framing of a house, the 2x4 studs.
And thin metal conducts heat almost instantly.
Right. So if a manufacturer tests their new wood insert inside a brick fireplace, and it passes UL 1390 because the brick safely absorbed all the heat,
And then a consumer takes that exact same certified insert and installs it into a factory-built metal fireplace surrounded by drywall and wood studs.
the metal will conduct that intense secondary combustion heat directly into the framing of the house. The passing grade in brick becomes a guaranteed structural fire in metal.
Wow, the safety simply doesn't transfer across materials. That makes complete sense. And that realization points us directly to the biggest exclusion listed in UL 1390. Section 1.7 explicitly states, this standard does not cover freestanding solid fuel space heaters.
It literally abandons you if you want a classic stove on legs.
Yeah, it gives you the exact standard to look for instead, which is UL 1482.
And that perfectly establishes the other half of our regulatory ecosystem. If 1390 is the strict standard for shoving a fire into a brick hole in the wall, UL 1482 is the veteran standard that governs the freestanding units standing out in the open room.
Let's look at the stats on 1482. This is currently on edition 7. It was originally published back on April 25, 2011, with its last major revision on June 15, 2022. So it is actively maintained and updated.
The fact that a standard from 2011 has been revised as recently as 2022 tells us that it is a living document. It's constantly adapting to new manufacturing practices and historical safety data.
Its scope covers room heaters, which it defines as freestanding fire chamber assemblies. It categorizes them as either circulating or direct radiation types.
And unlike the extreme masonry environments of 1390, UL 1482 states these products are for attachment to residential-type chimneys and can even be used in mobile homes, provided they meet the HUD standards.
The risk profile completely shifts when the appliance is freestanding. It's no longer buried in a wall. Now, the engineering tests have to account for intense radiant heat projecting in 360 degrees.
Right, because direct radiation is like standing out in the harsh sun. The heat waves travel directly from the cast iron to the nearest combustible object.
Whether that's the drywall, the hardwood floor, or your sofa.
Exactly. The standard has to dictate the exact physical clearances required to prevent the surrounding room from spontaneously combusting from prolonged exposure to that radiant energy.
You mentioned circulating heaters as well. Those use an outer metal jacket to draw cool air in, heat it against the firebox, and push it back out into the room.
And pushing that air out usually requires a fan.
Which brings me to the detail in UL 1482 that genuinely terrified me. The standard explicitly states that it covers units with electrical accessories. It lists field-installed, cord-connected, or permanently connected blower assemblies rated at 250 volts or less.
Referencing the National Electrical Code, yeah. It is the unavoidable reality of modern heating efficiency. You need electric blowers to move the warm air through the house.
But just picture the physical setup. You have a cast iron box containing a roaring 1,000-degree wood fire, and you are bolting a plastic and copper electric motor directly to the back of it, and then plugging it into a wall outlet.
You're mixing high-voltage electrical components with an extreme sustained thermal event.
Yes, and that intersection is where UL 1482 really proves its worth. Think about the stress tests engineers have to run to certify that. They have to prove that the insulation on the electrical wires won't melt away after 10 years of continuous exposure to extreme radiant heat.
Or what happens if the motor seizes up? If the blower fan gets blocked by dust, the motor itself is going to overheat.
That is exactly the kind of failure point the standard anticipates.
Right. If the motor seizes and generates its own electrical heat while simultaneously being baked by the wood fire, the standard must ensure it won't trigger a short circuit that sparks a fire outside the firebox.
Conversely, it ensures the heat of the stove won't melt the grounding wires and turn the entire cast iron stove into a lethal shock hazard.
It is wild to think about the laboratories where they're actively trying to destroy these stoves just to prove they are safe.
It really is. But that brings up an interesting problem. If UL 1482 is highly specific about testing the fans and the wires we use today, what happens when a manufacturer invents something totally new tomorrow?
You were referring to Section 1.5, which is arguably one of the most elegant pieces of engineering law in these documents. It's a future-proofing clause.
It basically addresses the problem of writing rules for technology that doesn't exist yet. The text says that if a product contains features, components, materials, or systems that are totally new or different from what is specifically covered in the standard, it doesn't just get a free pass because of a loophole.
Manufacturers cannot exploit the fact that a standard didn't explicitly ban a new material. If someone decides to build a wood stove using a novel aerospace polymer instead of cast iron, or integrates an AI-driven smart thermostat,
Section 1.5 steps in and dictates that this unlisted system must be evaluated to determine that the level of safety as originally anticipated by the intent of this standard is maintained.
it forces innovation to surf the baseline of safety. The manufacturer has to work with testing laboratories to invent entirely novel stress tests just to prove their new smart stove won't glitch out, open the air valves all the way, and burn the living room down.
If the new features conflict with the underlying physics of safety, the product fails.
It's such a brilliant catch-all. It perfectly balances strict rules with the inevitability of technological progress.
So we've explored these two distinct domains. We have UL1390 locking down the masonry retrofits and UL1482 policing the freestanding room heaters.
Mhm.
But when you look at the catalog pages in their entirety, you see how these separate standards actually rely on the exact same regulatory DNA to protect your house.
They don't exist in a vacuum. Both documents explicitly state that the appliances must be installed in accordance with massive, overarching safety codes.
Right. They both point to NFPA 211, which is the broader standard for chimneys, fireplaces, and vents. And they both reference mechanical codes, the International Building Code, the BOCA National Mechanical Code, the Uniform Mechanical Code.
Which is critical because those overarching codes govern the actual physics of your house. Mechanical codes dictate the structural load-bearing capacity of your floors. I mean, get a hold of a 500-pound cast iron stove. They dictate the airflow and ventilation.
Because fire consumes oxygen. If your wood stove is sucking massive amounts of air out of the living room and your bathroom exhaust fan is running and your kitchen hood is running,
The mechanical codes ensure you don't create negative pressure in the house that literally reverses the chimney draft and pulls carbon monoxide back into the bedroom.
exactly. The UL standards plug directly into the existing laws of physics for your home. In fact, if you look at the catalog page for UL 1390, under the reference standards section, UL 1482 is listed right there.
And on the 1482 page, under reverse reference standards, UL 1390 makes an appearance. They cross-reference each other.
They interact to ensure there is absolutely no gap in the safety net. If an appliance doesn't fit neatly into one standard, the text actively catches it and throws it to the correct document.
It creates a seamless web for the people who actually enforce these rules in the real world.
Which brings us back to the real-world crisis we mentioned at the start. The transition right now is messy.
It's incredibly messy. Delays in certification under UL 1390 are severely limiting access to compliant wood stoves.
Yeah.
Testing labs are backed up, and manufacturers are scrambling.
And as a result, consumers are completely unaware of the difference between UL 1482 and UL 1390. You walk into a store, and you just want an insert.
Right. And retailers and installers are facing huge challenges. They are the ones on the front lines having to explain these complex compliance requirements and why a specific stove might be delayed for months.
Add to that, code officials and insurance carriers are inconsistently citing acceptable standards. Depending on your county, one inspector might demand a 1390 sticker for a retrofit, while another might still accept a 1482 sticker because they aren't caught up yet.
The lack of clear public communication is causing massive confusion in the industry. It's frustrating for everyone involved.
So what does this mean for you, the listener? What is our guidance for consumers purchasing wood stove inserts during this transition?
First and foremost, check the metal listing plate on the back of the appliance. That plate tells you exactly what standard the unit was tested to.
If you are pushing an insert into an existing brick fireplace, you really need to verify if your local authority having jurisdiction requires UL 1390.
Exactly. Talk to your local building inspector before you buy anything. If you try to slide a freestanding room heater tested to 1482 into a tight masonry fireplace without the proper 1390 testing, the inspector could fail it instantly.
And if the inspector fails it, your homeowner's insurance carrier is going to invalidate your fire coverage. Insurance companies underwrite the risk of your home based entirely on the assumption that you are strictly adhering to these recognized safety standards.
So don't guess. Ask your retailer. Ask your inspector. But honestly, the industry shouldn't have to figure this out on their own.
No, they shouldn't. UL really needs to clear this issue up with a public statement addressing these transition delays and clearly defining the compliance expectations for local code officials.
A single, clear communication could solve so much of this bottleneck.
Hopefully they step up and do that soon. But understanding these documents isn't just a dive into obscure trivia. It is understanding the exact physical mechanics of how your home is kept safe.
It is the invisible system of thermal engineering and electrical stress testing that lets you strike a match, sit back, and enjoy that fire without worrying that the wild animal is going to break out of the cage.
It transforms an uncontrolled chemical reaction into a predictable, manageable source of comfort. We really covered the entire landscape today. We unpacked the brand new, highly focused UL 1390, exploring how it mandates continuous stainless steel liners to prevent the rapid expansion and cooling of exhaust gases in masonry retrofits.
And we explored the veteran UL 1482, breaking down the unique 360-degree radiant heat risks and the high-voltage electrical testing required to keep freestanding room heaters safe.
It completely changes how you view a simple fire on a cold night. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought that builds on what we discovered today. We talked about Section 1.5 in UL 1482, that elegant future-proofing clause that forces uninvented technology to prove it can maintain the baseline of safety.
The mechanism that anticipates the unknown.
Right. So as you look around your home or look at how new homes are being constructed today, consider how rapidly building materials are evolving. We're seeing houses built with 3D printed polymers. We're seeing advanced synthetic insulations replacing traditional fiberglass.
The materials are getting lighter and more efficient, but often more volatile.
Exactly. So as the very physical structures we live in continue to radically change, what will the solid fuel safety standards of the future actually have to look like to keep that ancient primal fire safely contained? It's something to mull over the next time you feel the heat radiating from a hearth. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you for listening. Keep asking questions.